All right, we are back here on the podcast, getting ready to talk about the Mets as they enter a critical final week of the regular season before they get into the playoffs. Joining me today, thought the Mets in the offseason him last year. Now we're sort of seeing the fruits of their labor here. Michael Barron is here. Michael, how are you?
Good. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you indeed here. I got to say, when we talk about the Mets in the offseason, I did not think we could have imagined a scenario where the Mets sort of put together this kind of year where we're in late September. They're going to win 100 games, more likely than not. They have a shot to win the World Series after all this. Can you give me sort of your general feel on how this year has gone for the Mets?
Well, I agree. I think they've exceeded even. I, I would assume they've exceeded the front office's expectations. I mean, I know they'll say like, we expect to win every game, blah blah blah, but I think they played, and really since day one, they played, this brand of baseball, which I don't think anyone quite expected. I mean, their offense is so contact centric. They don't hit for a lot of power, but they get on base, and even amidst their slump in early September, they still managed to keep their head above water. Even though it was against second division teams, and they're still, since the All Star break, I think they're the league leaders in batting average and on base percentage. I mean, I think they've gotten what you would expect out of Max Scherzer, perhaps even a little less because he's been hurt, quite a bit. And I think, going into the season, maybe there was an expectation that Jacob DeGrom would be available for more games. And so I think they've done a lot more with a lot less than people thought they would do at the jump. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it speaks to the culture and the character of the team. I think the manager matters a lot in this case. I think he's hands down the manager of the year, by the way. Given, I know the payroll was high, but, he's had to deal with a lot of adversity, a difficult schedule. His top two starting pitchers not pitching together a whole lot. And yet here we are, like you said, they're on pace to exceed 100 wins. And, they're in good shape to win the division, that's for sure. They still need to, continue to work and take care of their own business against the Marlins going into the Braves series at the end of the week. But, here they are, despite it all the doubleheaders and the rainouts early in the year and, not having DeGrom, not having Scherzer, all that. And it's amazing. I think they've exceeded, those expectations for sure.
Yeah, I think amazing is definitely the right word. I'll touch a couple of points you start with Buck Showalter. I do feel like it should be the front runner for the NL Manager of the Year based on everything you said here. I mean, like, how important do you feel like he's been to this team? I feel like any other manager like his team is like at least like 8 or 9 games behind the Braves right now, what they've gone through this year.
Yeah, well, and I think, all things being equal, that they've been able to stave off the Braves, who have been insane since June 1st. Like they've been absolutely insane since June 1st. That they've come this far and have, relinquished first place for just 24 hours. Given how well the Braves have played and what the Mets have been through, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty incredible. And just when you think the Mets are on the brink, they have 1 foot, over the ledge, they pull back and they go on a run again. And like I said, that's they've had a lot of great character building wins over the course of the year. Those that amazing comeback against Philly, the amazing comeback against the Cardinals. Just to mention those two, plus they're really well played season series against the Dodgers. I mean those are the kinds of games that bring teams together. And I know it's about the talent on the field, and they have a huge payroll. And don't get me wrong, but they're still human beings, despite how much money, no matter how much money they make. So, I think they're a great story. Despite given what they've had to go through all year. I mean, I know every team has had the same number of doubleheaders, but you cake on the doubleheaders because of the rainouts, plus the they've had a more difficult schedule than the Braves. I mean, no, that's a pretty under discussed topic. I mean, the Braves have played, I think 6 or 7 fewer games against teams under 500 this year than the Mets have, and the Braves are under 500 against teams at or over 500, whereas the Mets are 10 games over. So, they've been able to persevere, and that's another big reason why they're in first place, because they've hung in against a real difficult schedule. And I think they may be a better team even than their record would indicate, given the schedule and the circumstances. So, it could just be sounding like a homer at this point, but I think when you look at the Dodgers record, and with all due respect, of course, I mean, it's an amazing team. Everybody knows that's an amazing team. They don't have the competition in the NL West, and they don't have to deal with the Yankees, and they don't have the same strength of schedule that maybe a team like the Mets have had over the course of the year. And that matters. That impacts the record. So they could be a better team than even the record would say, and the Mets are a 100+ win team.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And I want to talk about the importance of winning the division you brought up here, because obviously this series against Atlanta is really going to determine everything, because they need one win for the tiebreaker. If they can take care of business against the Marlins, they should enter the series up in the division here. I'll get to the weather situation in a second here, but like, what's the difference in your opinion, between them winning the division, getting that 2 seed, as opposed to being the 4 and having to host the 3 wildcard games in Citi Field? Those are the two options they really have left on the table for themselves right now.
Look, I think look no further than the Starling Marte situation, right? I mean, if you can get him, another 3 or 4 days off or 5 days off to get that hand a little healthier, right? I mean, that could be the world of difference rather than, forcing the situation where he has to come back prematurely, where the hands, he's still dealing with a lot of pain and, he's still building strength and so on and so forth. I mean, I think that's one key difference. And look, like, the fewer games that you need to play to get to the World Series, like, the better off you are. Like, you never know what's going to happen in a 3-game series. And, if they get the Padres, the Mets didn't exactly fare well against Padres this year. The Cardinals always seem to have this kind of magic that follows them, like, every year. And, you don't want to play in a wild card series, even if it's going to be at home, even if they know they'll have DeGrom, Scherzer, and Bassett throwing in that series. Like, you know, on any given day, Adam Wainwright has waved his magic wand at the Mets for years. Yadi Molina has waved his magic wand at the Mets for years, and that's just 2 examples. You just don't. The fewer games you have to play in the playoffs, the better, right? And so you want that division. Plus, the division is a far greater accomplishment, right, than winning the wild card, especially for the Mets, who have been in first place, minus 24 hours since April 11th, right? To finish with that's wild card, even if it's the top wild card. It feels a little bit like the season gets spoiled in that case. I don't think it takes away from how good they are, but the division is the prize. That's what they want. That's what they want. A part of this run to be remembered for, that they persevered through it all. They were able to stave off the amazing Braves, right, despite it all. And I think that's really where it's at. I don't think a wild card is in there. I don't think that's what they're shooting for at all at this point.
Yeah, I also got the weather alert for this series here, because obviously we're recording ahead of the tropical storm Hurricane Ian right now is on track to, I think, make landfall in Florida here. It's supposed to pass over that Atlanta area over the weekend here. Like, how do you think the league's going to handle this? Obviously, the number one concern is obviously like make everyone's safe down there and all of this situation. In terms of the baseball stuff here with the Mets and the Braves here, like, do you see a world where they don't move up one of these games to Thursday for the off day to get in? Do you see like them moving it to a neutral site doubleheader? Like, I feel like there's a lot of options on the table here.
I can't see the Braves wanting to move anything up. I think it just doesn't seem like that would be the Hurricane is probably one of the most disadvantageous things for the Braves in all of this, right? Because they're a game out. They know if the Mets win, the magic number goes down by 3. So they want all these games in Atlanta where they're in front of their home crowd, where the Mets it's just a house of horrors seemingly in every big series, right? That they want those stars aligned for them. And if the Hurricane if the Hurricane moves that series to like wherever, like, they immediately lose that home crowd advantage. Like, I don't believe necessarily in a home field advantage as much as there's a home crowd advantage. And, it certainly matters here in New York. I think it matters in Atlanta, especially with that team and, that organization, the fan base. So I do, it's, I'm not a weatherman. I don't know. But there's a precedent for MLB to move games of significant import to different venues. It's not coming to the Northeast, because the Braves will never agree to that. The Braves would never agree to these games being played in Philadelphia, Washington, Boston, or anything that's within driving distance of New York, because what's going to happen this weekend if that's the case. So,
Yep.
I would expect the Braves would want that game, further west if possible. Obviously not in Florida. That would be a bad idea too. Even if, the weather was fine or okay, like there are plenty of Met fans there. I'm just, that's in their, going through their heads. Like it's a very, very smart organization. So they're going to want it as neutral as they can. I think we just have to wait a couple of days to see what MLB decides, as the forecast becomes a little clearer, and the track becomes a little bit clearer. I mean, they may get away with this after all and be able to play in Atlanta. Time will tell, but I'm sure they're making plans just in case.
Yeah, assuming we would hear by tomorrow, like before these teams have to travel. I would assume that's when we hear about this.
Yeah, I would expect you'll hear something, like I said, in the next 48 hours. I would agree.
We still got some playoff scenarios here for the Mets here, starting, I think, with the big question of the hour of the last few weeks here has been, what do the Mets do with the DH spot against the right-handed hitting, with the righties against the lefty pitching? Because obviously the Darren Ruff thing, I think, has been beaten to death on Twitter. It has not worked out for them under any circumstances here. They're kind of in a buy until Starling Marte comes back here. Like, do you think this ends up being a situation where they just keep running Ruff out there and hoping he gets going? Do they give Vientos more of a shot? Do they just go the Eduardo Escobar route? How would you handle the righty DH?
I think you're starting to see them go with Vientos a little bit more. I think his bat has started to come around a little bit too, which is a nice thing. I think ultimately the team should want to give those at bats to the younger player, especially when the veteran has struggled in the manner he has. I mean, you're absolutely right. Vientos has been I'm sorry, Ruff has been terrible, right? And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I think they'll roll with Vientos at this point until Martes becomes available. And then, we'll just have to see. Like, it depends. I think it depends on the situation. Like, it's difficult. Buck is the kind of manager where, he may defer to the veteran in those pressure cooker situations, right? He may. I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that because, he has, like I said, Ruff has been ineffective. It's a big problem for them. I mean, I don't necessarily have a good answer for you, except at this point, they have nothing to lose by going with Vientos, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to continue to, go with something that has failed him for the last 7 weeks. So I expect it'll be Vientos, and when Marte comes back, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think the problem I see with the whole Ruff thing is not even just like the fact he's not hitting, it's the fact they keep hitting him like 5 or 6 in the lineup, and like there's short circuiting rallies the way the lineup's constructed.
Well, yeah, he's just been an ineffective player. That's all there is to it, right? I mean, time and time, excuse me, time and time again, he's come up in key spots and failed. He's failed to get rallies going. It seems like he's maybe has like 3 or 4 hits since he got here, literally, and that's just not going to play in a pennant race. And I think the Mets know that, which is why you've started to see Buck shift to Vientos a little bit, and I think that's paid dividends. Vientos hit his first home run over the weekend in Oakland. It always it often, I should say, takes a while for hitters to for the game to slow down a little bit for the young prospects that come up through the minor league system, especially with a lot of the ones that with a lot of fanfare, especially in New York. It seems right. It always just seems to take time. So I think at this point, Vientos is owed the opportunity. How long that lasts will depend on how much he hits, right? But either way, if Marte comes back this weekend, and that's the hope that they can at least activate him and he can be available. Maybe not play in the field, or maybe he's available off the bench. But I think they need his option. They need him as an option this weekend, if at all possible, right? I mean, I don't think it's difficult to go into that Brave series without like arguably their most athletic player on the team.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's a really great player.
He absolutely is here. Let's talk about the playoff rotations there. Obviously, like assuming they get to the NLDS here, they have the top 3 locked in with DeGrom, Scherzer, and Bassett in some order here. Like, who do you see being their 4th starter for that round?
It's a good question. I think the difference between Walker and Carrasco is negligible, and that's what it's going to come down to if they decide to go with 4 starters. And I don't think that's necessarily a foregone conclusion. I mean, it depends on the schedule and how it all plays out. I think ideally you'd like to go with, the 3-headed monster, and use the off days to the advantage. I mean, you don't want to, if someone's turn in the rotation comes around and it's 3 days rest, then you insert the fourth starter. I don't think they should have a static 4-man rotation going into the postseason. Off days, rainouts, there are a lot of different things that change things up. And I think right now the conversation should be centered around, okay, well, how do they win the division? And then, win the division, then they can figure out the rotation because they'll have a better idea what the schedule looks like, right? Because if they win the wild, if they're forced into the wild card, it's a 3-man rotation anyway, right? Because it's a 3-game series, then a day or two off before the division series, and then they can reset and go back to number one anyway. So, I think it just depends. I don't even think it should be a discussion until they know exactly where they are in the tournament. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, the way, assuming it stays according to plan, they basically have, I think, their big 3-mile for Atlanta, and then I think Bassett would pitch 162. But even now with the hurricane throwing this, you can't really do anything about that yet.
No, and look, I mean, I don't think they're gonna rain anything out. I think they're gonna move games if they know if there's even a threat of a rain out in Atlanta this weekend. I think, and there are gonna be no doubleheaders.
Yeah.
That's just my personal opinion. They can't do that. It's not fair to either team.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's talk about the playoff bullpen here, because obviously Edwin Diaz has been great all year. We figure at this point that Seth Lugo, Adam Ottavino, Trevor May are going to be locks in. If Michael Givens is back from the COVID list, he should be in here. How do you think they round out the bullpen?
That's another mystery. I mean, every time I always say the bullpen, the linchpin in the bullpen is Seth Lugo, right? If Seth Lugo's pitching well, the bullpen seems to be pitching well. When Seth Lugo isn't pitching well, they're left to they're left scrambling to try and fill that role. And Seth Lugo's been up and down. He's been inconsistent. I think he had a good run here in the middle of the season, but he's regressed a little bit as expected. I mean, like you said, Ottavino and Diaz are no-brainers for the end of the bullpen. They have to get Givens back and get him going again. There's no doubt about that. I don't personally think Drew Smith is in play at the moment. I don't think he's pitched enough, and I don't think he's shown enough. Just to be perfectly honest, I don't think he's going to be a factor. Certainly not. In pivotal postseason innings. Trevor May, he had a rough weekend, but I think he's been better lately as well. And I think Trevor May, they're going to live and die with Trevor May at this point. Because who else would they go with? There's nobody else to turn to in that role. So he would be, your typical seventh inning reliever. From there, but they have to carry. I mean, it just depends on how many starters they carry, which will determine what they do with David Peterson. And there are a lot of balls in the air. How does David Peterson fit into this? Has Tyler McGill shown enough to be a late inning reliever for them? The stuff is certainly there, but again, has he shown enough competence in that role? That's a big adjustment for him. It's a big adjustment for David Peterson. So, point is, you hear a lot of ifs and question marks between Smith. Lugo will be there, but he's still a question mark. Peterson, McGill, Givens has to come back. So the bullpen is a big question right now. It's a concern because of all this stuff.
Yeah, do you think they would go without a lefty? Because really their only options in the bullpen right now, lefty-wise, are Peterson and Joely Rodriguez. Is not very either converted starter and guy who's not been very consistent all year long.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's the bullpen. The amazing part about the bullpen, it's really Edwin Diaz and Adam Ottavino, but they're 86-0 when leading after 8 innings. But when you look at the way the bullpen has performed in general, you think about that stat and say that's just not possible. But that's because the 8th and 9th innings have been so locked down for them. The problem has been getting to the 8th inning for them. Again, they're 97 and 50, whatever they are. So they haven't had too much of a problem, getting to the end of the games. But in the playoffs, I mean, you're starting to see an evolution in the way the starting pitchers are managed. They're the better teams seem to be able to lean on their bullpen the most. The Astros are very good at that. The Dodgers are very good at that in the postseason. The game almost changes in the tournament as they, just so. It would be very difficult for the Mets to lean on the bullpen for 12 plus outs consistently because of all the questions and issues that they've had in that part of the bullpen. Um, and they can only go to the well so often with Adam Ottavino and Edwin Diaz as well. Although they're going to pitch, they're going to pitch till their arm falls off in the playoffs. But there's only so much you can get out of them on, if you're just going to keep, going to the well with them. So they have to find someone else who they can trust to take the ball and get them to those later innings, because they're not going to be able to rely on Diaz for 5 outs all the time. They're not going to be able to rely on Ottavino for more than 3 outs all the time. So, who's that guy? Well, maybe it's Gibbons. I think Seth Lugo has to prove it, a little bit more. But Lugo certainly has a track record along with Givens of being a top reliever. But these are all questions. These aren't necessarily the questions you want to be asking a week before the playoffs start.
No, it also doesn't help them because if they had more of a cushion in the division, we sort of wrap like, okay, maybe we take like Carlos Carrasco, who's not in the rotation, and put him in the bullpen, but they still need to make starts. They still might need those games.
Yeah, I mean, and the question about someone like Carrasco, like what role would he be in the bullpen, right? Like, is he going to be a long man? Then you have Trevor Williams. Where does Trevor Williams fit in all this? I think Carrasco will be on the playoff roster. I like, why wouldn't he? He's a 16 game winner. He can be an 18 game winner or whatever it is. He's got 15 wins. He can be a 17 game winner when it's all said and done. Like, why wouldn't you want that kind of quality pitcher on the staff? But if they go with a 4-man rotation, you figure one of Carrasco or Walker will go to the bullpen. I kind of feel like I like Carrasco in that bullpen role. I think his stuff plays a little bit better for it. I think I don't know. I think he has a longer track record. He has a little bit of a history there. So, but I don't know. These are questions, I guess, if they win the division for next Thursday, right?
Yep.
Let's hope we're having this conversation next Thursday and not like we're not talking about the wild card series.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, let's be positive here because I know Met Twitter tends to be very negative, but we'll be positive. We'll say they hold the Braves off and win the division here. Like, if they get to the DS here, who would be the one team to be the most difficult matchup for them, who they could draw? Because they're basically in the half bracket, get the Cardinals or like the 6 seed, where that's Philly, San Diego, or Milwaukee.
I'm worried most about San Diego because I like their pitching, right? And their pitch, they can shut you down on the mound, and they did shut the Mets down on the mound in the home and home series they played against them. I worry about them in a wild card series. It's one of the reasons why the Mets need to win the division. Like, let someone else deal with San Diego. The Mets. It's not a good matchup for the Mets. They can throw lefties at them. The Mets don't hit lefties. The Padres exploited that weakness. Of the Mets. So, um, I think the Cardinals are always tough. Like, no matter what, like, you look at their roster and you say, oh, well, how does this team in the postseason? And then everybody seems to be a good play. You look at the baseball card and everybody had a good year every year for the Cardinals, right? I mean, Paul Goldschmidt is, he'll probably win the MVP if I had to guess. Nolan Arenado is Nolan Arenado, so, and, Yadier Molina will always will haunt the Mets for the rest of his life, as will Adam Wainwright. So, there's no slouch on the National League side of this. I think, though, the team that the Mets, at least in the early rounds anyway, have to worry about is San Diego. I think that they can exploit the Mets' weakness the most.
Yeah, I would agree that. Nobody says the Cardinals because of the history and what the Cardinals do. The Cardinals don't match up with the Mets as well as San Diego does. You mentioned just because of the lefties they can throw at the Mets, and the Mets don't really hit lefties.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's not to say, I mean, the Braves are formidable against them because they have all those lefties. They have like 3 lefties in the bullpen. They can just shut the Mets down late in games, which they've done over the course of the year. But and I think you're going to see them use that strategy over the weekend. I don't know I think Max Fried is pitching at some point this weekend.
Yeah, he is.
You have Fried, you have Minter, you have a couple others down there too. We can't think of their names at the moment. But it's a problem the Mets have, and you just hope they overcome it, during the postseason. Otherwise, the Dodgers can also throw multiple left-handers at the Mets and, in a potential NLCS matchup. So, I guarantee that it's going to be a strategy from the other teams, and we'll just have to see if the Mets respond.
Yeah, I feel like that's why I feel like the division is so imperative to Mets because even if they do get out of the wild card series, they would still have to deal with the Dodgers in the NLDS. They could basically throw a whole left-handed rotation at the Mets in the NLDS, and that would not be fun.
Right. I mean, that's the fear that that you have what how many lefty starters that they I think the Dodgers have two or three lefty starters,
I,
and then
I
I mean
have
that's the thing about the Dodgers, they're amazing, and they don't even have Dustin May or Walker Buehler throwing right now. So and that's how awesome that starting pitching is.
Yeah, and I think if I did my math correct, I think they would be able to throw potentially Urias, Kershaw,
Oh, you're
uh,
right. That's right. Yeah.
Tyler Anderson, and Gonsolin would be the only right the Mets would see in that series.
Right. Gonsolin is.
Yeah.
I can't remember if they got. I don't think they got to Gonsolin in the series at Citi Field, right? I think they.
I think it was I think it was three lefties. I think it was Haney, Kershaw, and Anderson.
Yeah,
Yep.
they got to Heaney a little bit, but he shut him down. After when he settled down and shut him down. That's right. Yeah.
All right, so
So I mean, but that's I'm sure that teams looking at the Mets and saying, how do we get by Scherzer and DeGrom, right?
yep.
How do we beat Edwin Diaz? How do we get someone like how do we shut down the tandem of Lindor and Alonso, which has been the most productive 3-4 combination in baseball? They have 220 some odd RBIs between them, right? I mean, that's a difficult. The Mets are. We're talking about the Mets like they'll be underdogs in any series that they're in, and I mean, pretty much everyone except for the Dodgers will be underdogs to the Mets, right? I mean, I think that's just being fair. I mean, the Mets are a really, really, really good team, and the Dodgers may be just a smidge better, but Mets also won the season series against them, so um, there's a little bit there's a good history there.
Absolutely. My last thing I want to touch on here is obviously you brought Francisco Lindor here, and I feel like for all the crap he got last year and he was not good last year. I mean, he's been incredible this season. I mean, he had 100 RBIs as a shortstop here. He's played great defense. He's had a lot big power boost. I feel like there's not enough people giving credit to Lindor's year two bump here. I feel like he's sort of been like swallowed up by the nebula that is Alonso and the pitching staff.
Yeah, and he also got off to a slow start, and there were concerns there about, okay, like did the Mets, just get swallowed up by a long-term deal? But I think I mean, he's having the most productive year of his career, at this point. And look, he's been fantastic on both sides of the ball. He's a potential Gold Glove candidate at short. He's hit from both sides of the plate, specifically in the second half. I mean, he's been absolutely amazing. And I mean, I noted it the other day on social media. Um, so I think, like you said, he becomes, he gets a little under discussed because of Alonso, but Alonso is, part of, those two are, have a symbiotic relationship in the lineup, and one feeds off the other. And I've been saying for months now, where the offense goes, where Lindor and Alonso take it, right? I never ever fail to mention one or the other. Like they're both crucially important to the flows of that lineup. And when they're hitting, the Mets are you're not beating them. Like no one's beating them, right? But when they're not hitting, it's really difficult for them to score runs, and like really difficult. Like they're scoring like anywhere between 2 and 4 runs a game when those two are slumping. So they have to make sure they are going into October hot, and with the same energy they're showing right now, right? I mean, it has to continue. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for them in the postseason.
Yeah, it certainly will, Michael. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow social media keep up with your coverage over at Just Mets?
Yeah, so I mean, we have a daily newsletter at justmets.net. You can subscribe. It's free. We don't charge anything. We love doing it every single day. You can follow me. You can follow Just Mets on Twitter at just_Mets. I of course I'm at Michael G Barron on Twitter, and always willing to chat on social media with anybody who wants to talk about the Mets. My policy is keep it clean, keep it classy, and that's really it.
Sounds good to me, Michael. Thanks a lot of time. Really appreciate it.
You bet, anytime. Thanks for having me again.